morning, Magnolia Bible Church. And it's good to see you. Grab your Bibles, if you would, and turn to Esther chapter 1. Esther chapter 1. We're going to actually spend the next 4 weeks in this book, and we're going to kind of unpack this kind of unique Old Testament story. It's really unique because the name God does not appear anywhere in this book. And it's really just a story about how God uses Esther in his large meta-narrative. We've talked about the meta-narrative before: creation, fall, redemption, restoration, the 4 acts of God in the grand story, and Esther is a part of that. God had promised to Abraham that he would bless all the nations of the world through a descendant of his, and then in this story, one of the most powerful kings of the world is going to pass an edict that says that you could kill any Jewish person or every Jewish person. It's essentially thwarting the redemptive plan of God. And this book is really about God's timing, God's perfect, unique timing. Before we jump into that, I want to welcome our guests that are here this morning. My name is Steve Burrell. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's our privilege to have you here this morning. I want to welcome those that are joining us on our live stream and are part of our live stream church. Thanks for being a part of our service this morning. For our guests, if you would grab the connection card that's in your bulletin and put your name and each member of your family, their name on that connection card, and put a telephone number. We like to purchase Bibles and then have your name embossed on the front of that Bible, just as a gift from our church to you, to an encouragement to you on your faith journey. And so if you'll fill that out, put that in the offering plate, and put the offering plate to come by later, and that will be great. We just welcome you to our service. I've been gone for a couple of weeks, and it's a little disconcerting because people are not sitting in their normal seats this morning, and it's really bothering me. Jeff and Robin, I don't know what to do with you sitting over there, and there's other families that are around, and so next Sunday, make sure you get back to your regular spot, because I don't know how to talk to you this morning, because you're all moved around. You guys are still normal? Yeah, I'm going to say everyone, but it's just, yeah, we're doing good. How many of you enjoy cooking meals? Not baking, but enjoy cooking meals. How many enjoy cooking? All right, good. How many of you you don't enjoy cooking? You're go out to eat kind of people. You just don't like that kind of cooking. How many don't like it? All right, actually about half and half. So I semi enjoy cooking. I have, if you know me, I have some things that are like little issues for me, and I should not have said that, like for Tanya. And started cackling. I haven't started my story yet. And so, like one of my little things for cooking is I like all hot foods to be served hot, all at a very particular time. So, like, I want everything cooked to be cooked and produced hot all at the same time. Anybody with me on that? Okay. So, that is my little thing. My wife is not so much that as I am. She's not bad at it. She's just it doesn't matter to her. Like, it doesn't upset her if something, like, not that I'm upset, but maybe I am a little bit. And but I like that all to kind of go perfectly. And you know what I've gotten into? Have you tried pre-warming your dinner plates? Like putting your oven on warm and putting your dinner plates in the oven for no reason, because you're an American and you can waste electricity. And just pre-warm your dinner plates so your plate itself is warm. And then when you serve it, that's just like little mini food heaven for me. And as you would notice, I've been on vacation for a while trying to lose a little weight off of that vacation, so I'm a little obsessed with food today. And I think that's like really interesting. And then the more complex that it gets, like when you come to Thanksgiving and trying to make sure that you don't boil the potatoes, like make them mush in water before the turkey, and make sure you don't give everybody salmonella with the dressing and all, like getting all that stuff, or pre-boiling carrots if you serve a vegetable. Why do you need them? But you serve a vegetable, and so they're all mush by the time. You know what I'm talking about? How complex that is, and you know what I mean by like trying to get all those little things, and then I think about like restaurants, and that just blows my head. Like, you got to be cheating. They got to have something, like just putting everything in a microwave. I don't know. But, like, how you get all of that stuff, like, ready all at the same time. It's just like, ugh. So, like, those are little things. I know it's a dumb little illustration, but we try to kind of orchestrate these little things. And sometimes we get it all right, and we're just like, oh. But lots of times we're like, oh, the steak isn't ready, the mashed potatoes, they're just kind of soup, and we just kind of, the book of Esther is this really remarkable story of the timing of God. Like these little things that God is doing to bring about a different result, or bring about exactly what God is after. It's just this remarkable story of this orchestra, this design that God is putting together to bring about exactly what God wants done. And you've got these really foolish political leaders. And they are so dumb. It is hard to measure their stupidity. I'll give you an example. They literally pass a law telling all women to obey their husbands. And they all got together and thought, this is a good idea. We're going to unpack that. They're so dumb. They're so foolish. And they design this whole world, and they're coming up with all of these ideas, and their ideas are so foolish. Yet, in the midst of all of this political foolishness, God is working out a perfect design. So we're going to unpack in this book the sovereignty of God in the midst of political foolishness. We live in a time nationally where it doesn't matter where you are on a political spectrum, you can find foolish people. You can find people pronouncing great pronouncements of what they intend to never really do. And you can have people espousing things that are logically ridiculous. And if you are a very conservative person, you would have a champion who you say says the most brilliant things, and you look at someone on the other side and they are so foolish. And if you have a diverse life at all and you interact with people on the other side, they have their champions who they espouse great wisdom and identify others on the other side of an aisle, and they declare them to be foolish. We live at a time nationally where there's just turmoil and tumult, and you can look backwards in history and you can see just chaos, and you looking forward in history and you can see just complete challenge and struggle. And if you study what makes societies, you can look forward and say our society is breaking down, and you can look at what makes good fiscal discipline, and you can look forward and say, well, this is going to break down. And you can look at all those things, and when you get into that experience, you can ultimately lead yourself to a place of just despair. And what I hope to do over the next couple of weeks, the 4 weeks we spend together in the book of Esther, is to remind you that there is a sovereign God, even in the midst of utter foolishness. that God is not putting a meal together. God is orchestrating the vast symphony of humanity. And God is rising up kings, and God is moving chess pieces, and God is putting things in place to bring about exactly what he intends to do. He's fine. I do think the response to the book of Esther should be hope. I think the response should be like when you get all the way through this book and there's lots of drama in it and lots of like little things, parts moving, and it's pretty fun. And when you kind of come out of the book, one of the things you should leave with is just hope in the sovereignty of God in the midst of foolishness. Now, I think there's an application to this book politically when we look at our country and just kind of the general chaos of our country, but I also think that there's an application to us personally. I think there's times in our life when we look at the story of our life and what's going on in our life, and it's hard for us to understand the pieces and how they all fit together. Like Esther, and we'll see this in a second, but Esther's parents died. I mean, it's just horrible. It's a horrible story, and she's really reared by what is a pretty distant relative. Like, her story is not an easy story, and so she lives this vast majority of her life first enduring the grief of losing her parents, and then processing all the way through that, and then being brought into someone else's home, and all of that stuff. Through all of that experience, she knows nothing of what God's doing. Like, we know the end of the story, and so we can look back at it and go, well, that's really cool. Yeah, that doesn't help her while she's walking through burying her mom and dad. And I don't know your story, but you may be at this spot in your life where work isn't right, or relationships aren't right, or health isn't right, and you're just trying to figure all this stuff out, and you're trying to put all these things together, and I hope that through this series, you'll walk out with hope in a sovereign God over the mess and the chaos that comes inside our life. We're going to spend 4 weeks 4 weeks going through it. We're going to deal chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 18, the perfectly positioned queen. Next week, we're going to look at power-crazed politicians. Never introduced to anyone like that before. Power-crazed politicians, chapter 2, verse 19 to chapter 3, verse 15. Then in week 3, we're going to see a perfectly timed intervention, which is chapter 4 through chapter 5, verse 8, and then a perfectly timed resolution in chapter 5 through chapter 10, verse 3. And so that last one will be quite a bit. Esther is written about 400. It's actually written as an explanation to a festival, the Purim, P-U-R-I-M, the Purim festival that's still celebrated today, is a response to this, the end of this book, and this is written as an explanation as to why that is celebrated, and we'll talk about that down the road. The time period Esther is going to deal with the Persian king Xerxes. In our passage, he's called Ahasuerus. Or Artaxerxes. He's the Persian king. He reigns from 846 to 865 BC. He is the Persian king, the son of Darius. He's the Persian king that twice invades Greece and fails. The 300, whatever. And, that story, that make-believe, that's this king, and he's essentially the most powerful person in the world by far. He has a kingdom that reigns from what we would understand as modern-day Pakistan all the way down into Egypt, into Africa, into what we would understand as modern-day Sudan, and just has about 130, just short of 130 different provinces. He is remarkably rich. He is essentially unchecked in his power. He is married, but his wife would essentially be a slave. She would not possess any authority or power. She would have to do whatever he tells him to do. He tells her to do. And so into that reality, this book unpacks. This book is about the perfect timing of God and God's sovereignty in the face of foolish men. So we're going to read through, starting in verse 1. I am going to skip over the names that are in here, and if that bothers you, then you someday can stand on stage and read these names that you have no idea what they are. And you don't know who they are anyway, so we'll just skip them. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, which is Xerxes, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India, which we would understand as Sudan, and Ethiopia, which we would understand as Pakistan region, over 130 provinces, or 127 provinces, so massive. And really interesting, what the author is doing is showing just the might and the impression of how great this Persian king is. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, in the capital, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast to all of his officers, officials and servants, and the army of the Medes and Persians, the nobles, the governments of the province were before him. So he's got everybody around. While he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. So this thing is going on for about a half a year, where he is just proving to everyone how wonderful and awesome and amazing he is. Which, by the way, he's going to show to be really a paper tiger, because he tries to get his wife to do something, she tells him no. So that's essentially what the writer is doing as they're unpacking this, is they're showing how he's amazing, he's wonderful, he's awesome, he's full of himself. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. So they have a huge party that lasts for 7 days, and everybody gets bombed. Bombed. 7 days. Now, I am a teetotaler, and for those of you who are young, I'm sorry, those that are old understand that. And so I do not know what a 7-day bender is like, but Jeff, would you come up on stage? Just, I'm sorry, Robin. And so they're bombed. 7 days, they're blasted. Now, there were, again, big, opulent party. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches, like they're laying down and they're laying on couches that are covered in gold and silver on a mosaic, a pavement of porphyry. It's split in my Bible. It's hard to read it that way. Marble, mother of pearl and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels. Their cups were made of gold, vessels of different kinds. Royal wine was lavish according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict. There is no compulsion. At the time, you were legally required to drink whenever the king drank. And so he, to let everyone have as much fun as they wanted, said, hey, you can drink. You don't have to wait for me. Just drink as much as you want, whenever you want. It's on me. Go for it. For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. And his wife was having a party too, men not invited. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So the women are having their own party, the men are having their party, and the men are bombed. In Scripture, anytime you have power and alcohol, you have foolishness. Anytime you have power and alcohol, you have foolishness. And what's about to take place is foolishness. You find in the Proverbs when they're talking to the king and they're telling the king, don't give yourself to wine. The idea is, with power and alcohol comes foolishness. Don't be a fool. These guys are bombed. And he decides that he is tired of just being by himself, and he's going to bring his wife. And on the seventh day, when the heart of the men of the king was merry with wine, he's bombed. He commanded these guys, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Vashti before the king with her royal crown. So he commands her to come in order to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. And so whether or not this is a sexual, that she was expected to be inappropriate sexually, it is nonetheless a simple command from the king to his wife to appear at the banquet. This guy who's thrown this party for 180 days, a 7-day bender, everybody's drunk, having a good time, he's going to bring his wife in and show her off. Now, I don't think women have changed that much, but I just cannot imagine that this is going to work out. So he tells his wife, he's bombed, and he's bombed with all of his friends, and he gives a command because he wants everyone to see how pretty she is. And she says, "No, I'm not doing that." Have you ever told someone drunk on their own power no? Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. And at this, the king, drunk, got mad, and his anger burned within him. And now here we go. Now you've got a mad drunk who's drunk on his own power, and his wife won't do what he tells her to do. And then the king said to the wise men who are also drunk, who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were averse in the law and judgment, the men next to him being, and there's his 7 princes of Persia, who saw the king's face and sat first in his kingdom. So these are his chief advisors. And he wants to know, according to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not done what I told her to do. So he goes to his legal counselors and says, what do we do to my wife? I told her to do something, and she told me no. So you got a bunch of drunk guys together. And this bunch of drunk guys is now mad because his wife didn't do what he told him to do. And he's mad. And so he gets all of his friends together. And all of his friends are now going to tell him how he should handle his wife who didn't tell him what to do. Now, this is not going to turn out to be a good idea. We haven't read what it is, but whatever the idea is, you put a bunch of drunk guys together in a room, and they logically look at the problem. Whatever they're going to come up with is going to be a bad plan. Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, drunk, not only against the king has Vashti done wrong, but also all the officials and all the people who are in all the province of the king of Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all the women, causing them to look on their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. So what they say is, man, none of the women are going to do what we tell them to do. Like, you've got a real problem on your hand if you can't get your wife to do what you tell her to do. How do I expect my wife to do what I expect her to do? This is a real problem, and you've got to fix this because we're men. Now, that just sounds like the logic of a bunch of drunk guys in a room all by themselves with no women around. This very day, the noble women of Media and Persia who have heard of the queen's behavior will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath and plenty. That is, they won't do what we tell them to do. Oh, the horror. If it please the king, let a royal order go out. This is a great idea. This is a great idea. Could you imagine? Could you imagine the President of the United States calling a joint session of Congress or getting up on television for a State of the Union address and getting up there and saying something like, hey, I had told my wife that she was supposed to go to some state dinner and she didn't go, and so I'm divorcing her, and we just passed a law that says, all you women out there, you need to do whatever your husband tells you to do. I just passed this law. Like what law works like that? Who enforces this law? How does this work? Verse 19, if it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Medes and Persians. At that time, they were kind of dealing with the principle of the rule of law. The rule of law, whether it works or not, is still a general function in our psyche, that we understand that law, that no one is above the law, that no person, at least in theory, no person is to be greater than what the rules are applied. We accept that idea. That was not universally accepted at this point in time. And so in the Persian Empire, in the Medo-Persian Empire, they were dealing with certain rules that the king would pass, that the king himself would be subject to. And it wasn't great, it didn't work, it didn't go on throughout history. But this is really kind of the introduction in dealing with the idea of the rule of law. And so when you see the law of the Mede and Persian, it's the idea of a law that no one is above. And so write it among the law of the Mede and Persians, so that it may not be repealed, that Vashti would never come before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree was made by the king, when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all the kingdom, for it is vast, all women, because the king said so, will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. Now, what do you think these bunch of drunk guys thought about that idea? You put a bunch of drunk guys in the room, and you're like, hey, my wife doesn't do what I tell her to do. Oh, yeah? Well, you just show her you're the man. And, oh, boy. This advice, verse 21, pleased the king. Surprise. It's just so dumb. This advice pleased the king and the princess. And the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal province, to every province in its own script, and every people in its own language. They actually translated it, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of the people. And so he sent a letter out to everyone and said, you demand. So dumb. What happens to drunk people after a little while? They sober up. King sobers up. There's lots of homes have been wrecked. And lots of marriages have been wrecked by things said and done under the control of substances, alcohol and the such. And the interesting thing about it is there's some things that can't be undone. We used to draw a really easy line in the church. We used to draw a really easy line in the church, and the line is not so easy to draw anymore. But there's lots of foolishness that comes out with a person in power that gets inebriated and thinks that they're going to pass some rule or make some declaration or tell themselves to be who they are and let everybody else around them know how important they are. And you don't always get to put those things back in the box when you sober up the next day. Xerxes sobers up the next day and he realizes he is utterly and epically alone. He has just banished his wife. He's an idiot. He's just banished his wife. He is epically and utterly alone. This great king, this wonderful king, this amazing man who throws this great party. For chapter 2. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti, his wife, what he had done and what had been decreed against her. And the implication is that sad, and he knows he made a mistake. And the king, here's another great political solution. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king. Get you another one." Okay. "And let the king appoint officers in all the province of the kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem of Susa and the capital, and under the custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch who's in charge of the women, and let their cosmetics be given to them, and let the young women who please the king be queen instead of Vashti." And this pleased the king, and he did so. So the idea is to go throughout his entire vast kingdom and find all of the beautiful unmarried women, bring them into his harem, for him to have an experience with each one of them, and when he finds one that he likes, make her queen. This is disgusting. It's immoral, and it's cruel. These girls, their lives would be ruined. Because once you enter the king's harem, you don't leave. You would stay there for the rest of your life. You would have spent one day with the king, one evening with the king. He did not prefer you, which, whatever standard that's being used, he did not prefer you. You don't go home. You go back to his harem, and you never get married. You never have a family. You never have children. You never experience the connectedness and intimacy that God designed a marriage and a home to be. This is utterly cruel. This is a ridiculously over-the-top, foolish political solution to this man's inflated, ridiculous ego. King says, good idea. Like this. Make it so. Verse 5. Please the king. And he did so. And so there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. He's actually a relative of Saul. Saul, of course, was the first king of Israel. David supplanted him, but his family they fought a civil war over that. His family would not recognize that. They would have seen themselves as having a legitimate right to royalty. He was carried away by Nebuchadnezzar. When Judah was conquered, he was carried away, probably indicating that he held some high position of authority inside the kingdom. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle. The family goes Mordecai's father's brother's son's child is Esther. So Mordecai's father's brother's brother's son, Esther. So it's not super close. It's not that they're not related. It's just not super close. She's beautiful. This says she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure, was lovely to look at. His mom and dad were dead. I'm not supposed to say this because I said it in the first service and I'm going to get in trouble and I'm going to say it again, but when it says that she had a beautiful figure, what it means is that she was not skinny, because in Bible times, skinny was not attractive. Not skinny was attractive, and so she was a solid young lady. Let's go there, and then I won't go any farther than that. I went farther in the first service, and I don't think it worked. And there were things being thrown this way, so that's how I know. So she's pretty. She's beautiful. Not by how we understand beauty, but she's beautiful. It's a problem. Her life has been ridiculously hard. She's not living where she should be living. She's essentially a captive. Her parents have died. She was adopted and being reared by a distant family relative. And for no fault of her own, she gets wrapped up into this net that pulls her in. Now, we know the end of the story, that she becomes queen, but at this point in time, she does not know this story. She just knows her life. Essentially, the understanding of marriage and family and all of that is over. Verse 8. So when the king's order's edict was proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who was in charge of the women, and she makes the best of a bad situation. The young woman pleased him and found favor, and he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food. She probably liked to eat a lot because she wasn't skinny, so I'm just... like, they brought that out, and I don't know what that means, but here we go. She had 7 servants that helped her and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known to the people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. So she told no one that she was from essentially kind of a royal lineage or that she was Jewish. And every day Mordecai checked on her in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. So she does not know how this story is going to unfold. When the turn came for each woman to go into King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulation for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautification, 6 months with oil and 6 months with spices, and wow. And when the young woman went to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem. And she could take anything that she wanted. It was her time in the evening. She would go in the morning. She would return to the second custodian of the harem, Shaashgaz, and he essentially took care of the women for the rest of their lives because they would never go back to the king. He was also a eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her to be his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had been in charge of women, advised. And so Esther proves herself to be wise and teachable, and I think there's an application there. She's wise and teachable, and she takes only what is advised for her to take. And verse 16, and when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which marks over 4 years that have passed since this initial banquet, verse 17, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her king instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all the officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. It was granted a remission of taxes to the provision in the province and gave gifts with royal generosity. And so he cut their taxes for everybody, and he gives them gifts, and he makes Esther queen. Everything's great, right? No, it's just the start of the story. This whole story is going to break down. There's going to be all sorts of chaos that comes after this. But God is positioning perfectly Esther to be exactly in the spot that she needs. There's a great political evil that's coming. There's a great political problem that is really quite vast and very insidious, and it is a massive problem that God is going to solve by perfectly timing this young girl whose life has been a wreck up to this point. God is going to take this young girl, put her exactly where He wants her to be, so God in His sovereignty can thwart the foolishness of men. Here is this king. And this king has got all of these ideas, and he's super smart, and he drinks, and he makes lots of proclamation. He knows exactly what he's going to do. And here's God perfectly positioning all of His parts to thwart their foolishness. The Bible says that the heart of the king is in the hand of the Lord, and as the rivers of water, He turns it wherever He wishes. When you fly and look out your window and you can see a river, it's a meandering a little straw or a little string on the land. It goes this way and that. It circles up and back, and it seems to make no sense at all. And that's the illustration that God is using. God is saying that I, God, turn the heart of the king. Like a river turns in whatever way, I turn the heart of the king wherever I choose to turn the heart of the king. And the story of Esther is God in His sovereignty dealing with epic foolishness. None of us would sit here and think, boy, Xerxes is sharp. None of us would do that. We all can look at his foolishness and say, this is an epic disaster. And we can look at our own political structure, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. You can look at it and you can say, this is epic foolishness, and no one could disagree with you. It's just utter nonsense all the way around. And it's hard to find someone who has any ability to solve anything. And so we kind of get to the spot where we can walk ourselves right up to despair. But we would stop. Because there is a sovereign God in control of the story of history who's writing the story and perfectly positioning people exactly where He wants them to be to accomplish His purpose. And sometimes, in the midst of political systems, in the midst of really utter chaos, and who has any idea how this all is going to unfold nationally, we can lose sight of the fact that in spite of man's foolishness, God is orchestrating exactly what He intends to orchestrate, and He can raise up nations and tear down nations just as easily as He wishes. No problems. And when we come out of the book of Esther, what we're going to find is not some elaborate meal that God puts the parts together, but this entire nations, these movements of nations. God orchestrates all of these little parts to put all of these things together so that exactly at the right time, God is pulling off exactly what He wants done. Right at the time that He so chose. And I think there's a national application. I also think there's a personal application. I think there's a personal application. The stories of our life sometimes can get utterly chaotic. You can look at this event, and then this event builds this event, and they can look at it and they become overwhelmingly crushing or overwhelmingly chaotic. And you must remember that in the midst of the chaoses of life, there is a sovereign God who is putting exactly the story together that he is choosing to bring about his plan. So I don't know why you lost your job, and I don't know why this loved one is sick, and I don't know why this relationship that used to be solid broke down, and I don't know why physically things aren't really where they need to be, and I don't know why this person who used to have a vibrant faith journey no longer has one, and I don't understand all of those things, and I can't answer all of those questions, and no one could explain to Esther, why did your parents die? And no one could explain to Esther why she got caught up in this ridiculous dragnet, which is essentially ruining the lives of these young ladies. And she spends over a year in this environment. No one could explain, not till much later, no one could explain how all of those things were working. No one could explain to this little girl why her mom and dad died. Until later, when you look back at the story, that God allows us to see that God is orchestrating in His sovereignty exactly what He needs to accomplish His beautiful purpose. And so I can't answer these questions for you, other than to say there is a sovereign God who is writing a good story. And you say, Steve, but you don't know what so-and-so did. And I would agree, but contend that God is sovereign in the face of men's foolishness. These guys are so dumb. God is sovereign in the face of men's foolishness. And God is writing a redemptive story. And in the face of the story of your life, God is sovereign. You say, I don't know. Have hope. Have hope. When we pick this story up, Esther's in a good spot. We leave her as queen. She's in a really good spot. It's good. It's queen. And she's in a really good spot. She's about to have a problem, not of her own making, but she's about to have a problem that's going to threaten her own life. And all of her shrewdness and wisdom and discernment and courage is going to be needed as God orchestrates this beautiful symphony to accomplish ultimately His great redemptive plan. And we're going to pick up her story when we gather next Sunday morning. When this service is dismissed, and we're going to dismiss it in just a couple of minutes, for those of you who are here for the very first time, we have something called Starting Point the last Sunday of the month, this Sunday. Starting Point is for folks that are new to the church. It's an opportunity for us to have lunch together. We kind of unpack the church. We tour the campus. You meet the staff. We talk about our mission, our vision, our philosophy of ministry. And if you don't have lunch plans, would you plan on joining us for lunch? We're going to meet down the hallway in the room called the Garage. It's immediately down the hallway to my right, your left. I know there's another announcement I'm supposed to give to you, but I can't remember what it is at the time. And if you're wondering why I preached so long, it's because I didn't preach the last 2 weeks, and I've got to make up that time. Got lots of extra words for everybody. God, thank you for our chance to spend this time inside your word. And God, this young girl whose story is marked by tragedy, you have perfectly positioned her exactly where you want her to be, to accomplish your perfect plan. And God, there's lots of evil and there's lots of foolishness and there's lots of political disaster that's coming down the road, and it's monumental in its how catastrophic it is. Yet you, God, have been moving intentionally and purposefully to thwart that evil plan. And God, sometimes we can look at our national scheme and look at the insanity of our own American politics and think to ourselves that this is a catastrophic disaster, and we can lose sight of the fact that a sovereign God is writing the story of history. And God, we can do that personally in our own personal life where we see chaos and confusion and just things wildly outside of our control. And we can get to the place where we look at brokenness and despair. And God, instead, may we experience hope because you are the sovereign God writing the story of history in spite of the foolishness that is around us. That you are not thwarted by foolish men. That you hold the heart of the king and turn it where you wish to accomplish your purpose. And God, as we come out of this book, may we experience hope. May we be hopeful, not because we have solutions to all political or personal confusing situations, but we experience hope because you are the sovereign God in the face of men's foolishness. And God, may the hope of the gospel and the beauty of the cross of Jesus Christ emanate and go forward from us. Not fearful about tomorrow, but hopeful because the sovereign of the universe is writing the story he intends to tell. God, we ask that you take the offering that we're about to collect, and we thank you that we can give it. And we ask that you would use it here inside our church, in this ministry, as we endeavor to engage our community and also in the ministries that we support all around the world. God, take what's given today and multiply it for your fame in your name. In Jesus' name, amen.